The Rigel-class Starship is a mid-sized cruiser introduced during the 2330s as a replacement for the aging Excelsior class, members of which had been serving since the 2280s. Although built to be cost-effective in its use of resources and build time, and an ambitious build plan of 60 ships being intended, only 21 of the type were built. Measuring in at 502 meters long, 282 meters wide, and 102 tall, the ships held a crew of around 500 officers and enlisted crew. Armed with the then-new phaser arrays over the traditional banks, the Rigel also had forward and aft torpedo launchers of the rotary type, its firepower being superior to even the modernized Excelsiors then in service. The ship was capable of achieving speeds as high as warp factor 9.2 and had a normal cruising speed of warp factor 8. By the late 2320s, it was becoming increasingly clear to Starfleet that the Excelsior class was reaching the end of its useful service life. The design, which dated from the 2270s, was among the most successful and widely produced classes in Federation history. But even the youngest member of the class were approaching 30 years of age. Indeed, in any other period, Starfleet would have begun introducing a replacement for the Excelsior in the early 2300s. But the post-Treaty of Alderaan environment of general peace and stability the Federation found itself in meant that that had not happened, with politicians instead spending money on infrastructure and public works rather than investing in strengthening Starfleet. Small numbers of new designs were produced, and many repeat Excelsiors were constructed, but no wholesale replacement would materialize. Starfleet, thus, keenly aware of their fleet's increasing age, began development of a clean slate design which took many of the positive features of the Excelsior and added to them, while also removing many of the more flawed aspects of that design. It was planned to build 60 ships of this class in an initial production batch, with additional members of the class following in the coming decades. USS Rigel commissioned into Starfleet in 2335 and immediately proved to be a popular and well-designed vessel. Well liked by her crew, although only a slight improvement to the Excelsiors, the Rigel introduced many modern features and design elements into Starfleet service, being also a much roomier vessel for her crew, with better amenities and more room than older ships. Rigel was soon joined by 20 sisters, all delivered prior to 2340. Further vessels of the class being cancelled, some midway through construction, in favor of a refit of the Excelsior class, which brought that ship up to a more modern standard at 80% of the cost of construction of a new Rigel class. Regardless of their small presence within Starfleet, the Rigel class served with distinction, being used prominently along the Federation's borders as explorers and occasionally as warships in the few conflicts the Federation found itself engaged in during the later years of the long peace of the first half of the century. By the time of the Cardassian border wars, the Rigels had been put through a process of refit to bring them up to the standards of the most recent Starfleet classes, putting them in good condition to fight in the slew of conflicts the Federation would engage against the Borg, the Cardassian Union, the Klingons, and the Dominion. Post-war, the 11 survivors of the class have been placed in reserve, awaiting disposal after fighting hard wars and with many stressed components. Although it was built in only limited production numbers, there was one variant of the Rigel built, the 9 ships of the Niagara-class fast scout cruisers. Built in the late 2350s from incomplete Rigel hulls, the Niagara was built to serve as a fast scout and patrol cruiser for Starfleet after the failure of the Cheyenne class, as an interim solution, while a new ship, the future Intrepid class, was built to serve the role. Niagara had many faults and a strange design, but served well in their temporary work, being decommissioned even before the outbreak of the Dominion War, with one vessel lost in the Battle of Wolf 359. Built in small numbers at a time when the Federation did not feel the need to keep its fleet modern, the Rigels are an often neglected and sadly forgotten, though important evolutionary step in the development of Starfleet cruisers, fitting in between the older Renaissance and more modern Ambassador and Korolev classes. In a scenario where these ships form the core of a modern and up-to-date Starfleet, it must be wondered how the Federation would have weathered the threats which attempted to destroy it. Likely much better, though who can know for certain. I hope you enjoyed this video. The Rigel class is a ship that we know next to nothing about, though it is canonical. This is my interpretation of the ship's service, with various fan recreations of what the ship may look like in universe. I hope you liked it. If you did, then do all of the things professional YouTubers are always nagging you to do. Whether you do those things or not, have a nice day.